Sacrament of marriage. I'd like to keep it interactive, so if you have questions, please feel free to ask as I go through this. Marriage has been the foundation of society for millennia, since the beginning of time. It is the building block, if you think about marriage and family, it's the building block for all other relationships that we interact with. If there weren't families, those relationships I don't think would be grounded, okay? And we believe as Catholics, as Christians, that God created marriage. We hear in the book of Genesis, the very first book, from the very beginning, that God instituted marriage. And let me read from the first chapter of Genesis. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them have dominion over fish of the sea, birds of the air, and the cattle, and over all the wild animals, and all the creatures that crawl on the ground." God created man in his image. In the divine image, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Get it? All right? God blessed them and said, "Be fertile and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and all the living things that move on the earth." So God created marriage. He created man and woman to be together, to be in relationship with one another, not to be alone. When I think back, I'm 65 now, yesterday. Happy birthday. Don't know where that time went, but I reflect back over 65 years, and I can't imagine being in any other type of relationship other than marriage. If we didn't have it, where would we be? Okay? I don't like to quote the Catechism of the Catholic Church too much, but I think it's important to hear what the Church teaches about men and women. Man and women were made for each other, not that God left them half-made and incomplete. He created them to be a communion of persons in which each can be helpmate to the other, for they are equal as persons, bone of my bones, and complementary as masculine and feminine. In marriage, God unites them in such a way that by forming one flesh, they can transmit life. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. By transmitting human life to their descendants, man and woman, as spouses and parents, cooperate in a unique way in the Creator's work. Notice that the Church is saying several things. First, that we were created to be together, man and woman in marriage. That's why we're here. Secondly, we're equal as persons, but we're not the same. Man and women are different. Shouldn't be a surprise. They complement one another, and they are equal in that relationship of marriage. And when they do that, the two individuals become one body, one flesh. And then God says, be fruitful in that relationship. Two become one in marriage, and then two become one by being fruitful. The man and the woman, and then the child. Just another way of looking at that. When we are in a sacramental marriage, we get to participate. Think about this. We get to participate in that miracle, the creation of life. God creates life, but we cooperate with him to do that. And it happens within marriage. And in that love that parents have, we say that it's unconditional, and that's one of the reasons why it can't be broken. I always think back on that, with my 3 children and now my 5 grandchildren. How many of you have children? Okay. Have they ever pissed you off? Probably some of you say, yeah, every day, right? But and I'm sure spouses have said the same thing, right? You know, spouses do things that annoy one another all the time. But what God is trying to tell us in the sacrament of marriage is that in spite of those instances, the love that one has for the other never goes away. There's nothing my kids can do, my grandkids can do, that would make me not love them. There's absolutely zero, okay? And that, to me, reflects the same unconditional love that a man and a woman has in marriage. There's nothing, and I didn't know this when I got married, but in reflecting back on it with my children, there's nothing my wife could do that would make me not love her. That is sacramental marriage. That is Catholic marriage, okay? And so, and I think Jesus confirmed that which God was trying to say, not trying, he always says what he wants, was saying in Genesis. Jesus confirms that, and let me just read to you from Matthew, because the Pharisees were trying to trick him, and some of the Pharisees approached him and tested him, saying, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" Meaning the love was conditional, that the wife did something, I can leave, all right? Jesus said in reply, "Have you not read that from the beginning the Creator made them man and female, male and female? He said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore what God has joined together, let no human separate." God joins us in the sacrament of marriage. Why? Because he's modeling the unconditional love, or we're trying to model his unconditional love for us. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Now, I don't have to tell you there's a lot of confusion in the world surrounding marriage. Would you agree with that? Okay. Why do you think that is? That was not rhetorical. Why do you think there's so much confusion today about what marriage is?
I would say it's a deterioration of cultural values, and partly, not making excuses, but like for example, technology, how it deteriorates the individual. There's certain things that can affect the family, and that's one example.
Okay. Well, we were just talking about in Scripture how God defines marriage. Right? Is that the same way the world defines marriage? Yeah. Why not? If God creates something, does man have the ability to change it? No. But if man creates marriage, can man change it? And that's what's happening. We have a different way of saying the same thing. We've moved away from God being the creator, being the center of our society. And we like to think that we now are the center, that we control the relationships within this society. Would you agree? And if we do that, then we can change it. And if we can change it, we can define it any way we want to. And I think that is what's happening today, that we believe that we created it, so we can change it. And think about a lot of things, not just marriage. There are a lot of things in our society that man is trying, and when I say man, I don't mean it men, I mean it, humanity is trying to change it because we think we can. How's that working out for you? Right? Not working out so well, because we think we're in control when we are not. Okay? If we look at the way we as Christians, we as Catholics define marriage, and the way the world tries to define marriage, I like to look at it in three different ways. The first is, we believe that marriage is divinely revealed. God told us what it is. And we do not have the ability to change that definition. Whereas the world thinks they defined it, and therefore they can change it and make it anything they want. First. Secondly, We believe in Christian Catholic marriages that the man and the woman are equal in value. That does not mean they're the same. It's obvious they're not, right? So we think they're equal in value but different in nature. They're complementary, they're not the same, okay? Whereas in the world, I think the world's trying to define marriage, that relationship, in an individualistic way, a chauvinistic way, in that I need to get something out of it. It's not just marriage. There's a lot of things in the world where people are trying to get something as opposed to give something, all right? So it's chauvinistic in that way. And that there are a lot of people in the world that are trying to say men and women are the same. They have to be treated the same. They are the same, when in reality, they are not the same, okay? And then that was the last thing, that we believe they're complementary in purpose. And what is that purpose? The two shall become one. Whereas the world's trying to define it as they're the same, as an individual. Okay, does that make sense? How many of you have been to a wedding? How many of you have been to a Catholic wedding? Have you really paid attention to the rite of marriage? The rite of marriage actually tells you about these things that I've just talked about, the meaning of a Catholic marriage. And I thought it might be useful to quickly walk through the marriage rite. You okay with that?
Yeah.
It's my game, so I get to set the rules. So that's what we're going to do. The first thing is a Catholic marriage, the rite of the sacrament of marriage, is a public event. That's significant, right? You're not doing this in a courthouse with just the couple and the judge, right? You're doing this in front of other Christians, other people, all right? What's the significance of that?
Commitment.
Okay, number one, there have to be three parties to a Catholic wedding. The parties are the couple, the officiant, doesn't have to be a priest, it could be a deacon or a bishop, and there are witnesses. Well, why is that? Well, who is the minister of the sacrament of marriage?
The couple.
The couple are, right? That is the only sacrament in which the couple are the ministers of the sacrament. All the other ones, it's clergy, all right? So what's the purpose of the clergy then? Who do they represent? The church. They're witnesses for the church. And then what? There's only one party left. What are they there for? The party after. No. Why are they? What are they there for? They're representing the community, the publicness of the rite. Okay? And in fact, you have to have two named witnesses. They have to be recorded in order for it to be, I think, valid. To be valid, certainly to be licit, what we say licit, okay? Okay, the sacrament of marriage can be either with or without, inside or outside of Mass. Typically the deacon would do a marriage outside of Mass. That's the one I'm most familiar with, although I know Mass. And so it begins by acknowledging that it is a public a ceremony, a public rite. We go into the liturgy of the words, and then we enter into the actual sacrament of marriage. And the first thing that the couple has to do, which gets to the essence of marriage, is they have to answer three questions, right? And they have to answer them in the affirmative. And if they won't do that, there's no marriage. We just stop and we move on. We move on to the party, all right? There's no marriage. And here are the three questions. It says, Joe and Nancy, have you come here to enter into marriage without coercion, freely and wholeheartedly? And the couple don't answer, we have. Why? They're not married yet. They have to both individually acknowledge that they've come wholeheartedly, freely, and without coercion. What does that mean? It's unconditional. There's no condition. Okay? Second question. Are you prepared, as you follow the path of marriage, to love and honor each other for as long as you both shall live? If it's unconditional, can it be broken? Can the vow be broken? No, because if it could, then it would be conditional. And so you're acknowledging as a couple that you come to this place, the church, to get married in the eyes of God unconditionally. The same love that God has for you. Jesus did not get up on the cross, right? He did not get up on the cross and say, if you do this, I'll do that. What did he say? I'm doing that. Why? Just because I love you. There's no expectation of anything else in return. That is what this question is getting to, is that you've come to this marriage with no preset conditions. If you pay off your credit cards, I'll marry you. If you lose 40 pounds, I'll marry you. Those are conditions, right? And so the church believes, and you must publicly acknowledge, that this marriage is forever, okay? And lastly, are you prepared to accept children lovingly from God and to bring them up according to the law of Christ and his church? So what's that all about? Be fruitful and multiply. If you are entering into the marriage as God has defined it, the two shall become one as a couple, but the two, as man and woman in their complementarity, shall also become one, a child. And if you're not willing to do that, that to me is a condition. You're adding a condition to the relationship. Does that make sense? The very first couple I met with to marry soon after I was ordained, actually was meeting with them before that, I asked them I always ask them that question. Have you discussed having children? And what's the outcome of that discussion? And they said, we at this time, we don't want to have children. I said, okay. I didn't say, okay, we're done. We're gonna happen. Right? So I said, all right, well, let's talk about that. Let's talk through that. What does that mean to you? Well, and a lot of couples, they say, well, we don't want children now. Okay. Does that mean you never want children? Oh, no. But I just can't have children. We just can't have children now. I get that. But the reality is, are you open to it within the confines of that marriage? Otherwise, you're adding a condition to it, and it's not unconditional. Does that make sense? Okay? Okay, then once, that is the essence to me of the marriage rite. Because once you agree to that, you affirm to that publicly. I have come here freely. I understand that it's unconditional, and I am open to having children and raising them. It doesn't say you have to have children, it says you're open to it. Then we move into that exchange of vows that we're all familiar with, right? And if you listen to them, they again get to this, right? I promised Joe, take you, Nancy, I think those were the names I used, to be my wife. I promise to be faithful to you in good times and in bad, right? In sickness and in health, to love you and honor you all the days of my life. You know, love in marriage is a choice that we make. If it was a feeling, right? What happens to feelings?
Come and go.
They change, right? Like I said, I've been married 40 years. They have not all been happy 40 years, right? There have been sad days. This year has been particularly tough for my wife and I. Not because of our relationship, but because some of our grandkids are going through some health issues. It's been a hard year. But because we chose to love one another, we choose to love one another every day, that hasn't affected that relationship. Because I understand, my wife understands, that there are good days, there are bad days. Good times and bad. Sickness and in health, right? No matter what happens, we choose to love one another. And that's what the marriage rite is trying to get to. I think that's just beautiful, right? If you listen to those words. And then you go into the exchange of rings, and then you go on with the rest of the Mass. And then there is a beautiful blessing of the couple. It's called the nuptial blessing. And he just talks about how God it's effectively saying what we have been talking about, that God created man and woman to be together in marriage, bless them, make them fruitful. Okay? And it's just a beautiful, and then that's the end of the rite. Okay? Again, I've done about 45 weddings. It's one of my favorite things to do just because it's, we get to be with people, baptisms, marriage, funerals, right? Hatch them, match them, dispatch them. So you're with people at their highs and their lows. And there's many blessings in the highs, there's many blessings in the lows, right? But one of the biggest joyful blessings is marriage. There's nothing about like watching a bride walk down the aisle with the groom standing there. And I always make sure I watch them watch each other, because it's just a beautiful, it's love, it's joy, right? And so I highly recommend that, next time you're at a wedding, make sure you really listen to the words of the exchange of vows, okay? I think I got all of that. Marriage prep. That's my guy. Marriage prep before you even get to the church to get married. There's a series of things that have to take place. The very first thing is what is called a prenuptial interview, where the officiant sits down with the couple and they interview them. It's a 4-page document, and then ask a bunch of questions. And guess what the questions are trying to get to? Are you coming here unconditionally? Right? I had a couple, had two couples. She was like 8 months pregnant, right? And they were coming, and it was a blessing they came to the church to get married. I think that's beautiful. But what's the concern? That's a condition. Why are you entering this? Well, because I'm pregnant. Well, let's talk about that, right? Let's talk about it. Maybe it'd be better to wait until after the baby was born to make sure there's not a condition that you're placing on this. Does that make sense? So you have to really talk to people about where they are to understand what brought you to this place. So to make sure they are coming freely, wholeheartedly, with no coercion. Okay? So that's the essence of that, is to make sure there's no impediments. We also, the church requires that couples attend a pre-Cana session. It's very similar to this in structure, in that, there's a series of presentations. We talk about, communication, right? How do you resolve conflict in a marriage? Think that's important? Think there's no conflict? All right? How do you bring spirituality to a marriage, right? We talk about intimacy. Most people, when you talk about intimacy, they jump right to physical intimacy. And I frankly, what is a 65-year-old deacon going to explain to a couple about intimacy, physical intimacy? I'm not here to do that, right? But what am I here to talk about is spiritual intimacy. What does it mean to be intimate with your spouse on a spiritual level? Because if you are intimate spiritually, you will be intimate physically, right? One follows the other. You don't jump right to physical intimacy. You have to be willing to surrender, to be vulnerable to one another before you become intimate. I think that's just human nature, right? We also talk about budgeting, financing. Have you talked about that? Couples are getting married later, which means they've been living on their own longer, which means they've kind of set up their life, right? And now they're entering into a relationship where two become one. What does that mean? 2 checking accounts become 1 checking account. Like what I have a condo, he has a condo. What are we going to do with that, right? It gets more complicated as the marriages are delayed, okay? Because couples have set up. So we talk a lot about budgeting, financing. Have you talked about all of that? That's all done in a 2-day retreat type setting. We also go through a process I use. It's called Focus. I don't know if you use that. There are other tools, but we also ask the couples to take an inventory. It's 150 questions, multiple choice, true, false, from a variety of subjects, whether it be communication, finances, spirituality, family tradition, right? And what it does is it compares the answer of the bride and the groom to see if they're in agreement. And then it takes that and it compares it, it triangulates it with the teachings of the church. And the hope is the two couples, the couple agree, and then what they agree on agrees with the church, the teachings of the church. And then I get a report, the officiant gets a report, and then we sit down and we talk about it. It's not a test, you can't fail it. In fact, you're not even allowed to keep it, okay? But what it is a great communication tool, right? And there are questions as benign as, have the two of you discussed having pets? Well, frankly, I don't care, right? I don't care if you want pets or not, right? More importantly, have you talked about it, right? Because if you haven't, all that's going to do, and there's conflict, it's just going to be conflict, right? You might as well, and if you haven't talked about having pets, what else haven't you talked about? You know, things like, who's going to do the laundry? Who's going to clean the bathroom, right? Who's going to take care? Like, you know, it's fascinating with my kids living, my daughter and son-in-law living at home, and their kids get up, and it's interesting to see their interaction about who's getting up in the morning, right? So, you know, all of those things, have you discussed a budget? Have you discussed credit cards, blah, 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 right? And then important stuff like, what are you going to do at Christmas? Right? We all have family traditions. Whose tradition is going to take place? So we go through all that process just to make sure that the couple has talked about, you know, things like pornography, all right? I've talked to priests that have gone into confession. That is one of the biggest destroyers of marriages is pornography, okay? And so have you talked about that? Have you talked about video games? All those things that can be barriers to having a healthy relationship, okay? Then there's also, if one of the parties is not Catholic or is not baptized, or you want to get married in a building other than a church, requires dispensation from the Archdiocese of Baltimore. The Archbishop has to give his approval. Now, he delegates that, but you get the idea. You have to get a dispensation for that. Okay? Any questions? I covered everything perfectly. Pardon? Yes. Yeah.
You mentioned the Pharisees had asked Jesus time to time about the sanctity of marriage. My thoughts are perhaps they were having some kind of, that was under attack during that time, because did Moses introduce something else?
Moses said yes. If you could have a bill of divorce, right? But so the law said yes, you could get a divorce, right? But Jesus was trying to say, yeah, I see the law, but the intent, the spirit, is that the two shall become one, right? And Jesus said, what God has joined, let no one separate. It's unconditional. So they were testing him and trying to trick him, but I think in his in wisdom that only Jesus has, he was able to turn that from a discussion on the law to a discussion of the intent. Yes, sir.
I have a kind of interesting question. You mentioned about technology and today and how people make their own choices and define things instead of what God wants. So how there's seems to be a prevalence of different sexualities, LGBT.
Mm-hmm.
How does that how does I guess the Catholic Church view that and because there's as you said, technology and stuff, we're becoming more aware of things, and people are possibly making their own beliefs instead of what God wants, like what you said.
Well, that's what I was trying to infer, was that instead of having God as the center and say, oh, God defined, according to Scripture, God defined us, men and women. There were two things, right? Now we believe that we know better because of the technology has now identified, I don't know what. I'm an accountant, I'm not a biologist, but to me, there's two things, a debits and a credit, right? for those that understand accounting. So the point is, I think as technology improves, we think we're getting more and more confident that we know better and that we can change what God has created.
So as a result, though, how does the Catholic Church respond to that community, and how do we continue with the Catholic faith as, you know, this world is, you know,
Sure.
progressing and all that?
Well, and this has nothing to do with marriage, but this, you know, truth is truth, right?
Yeah.
And it's immutable. You can't change it, otherwise it wouldn't be truth,
Okay.
right? So, you know, the fact that God, let's just use this one example, God created them male and female, that's truth, okay?
Okay.
Now, what do we do with that truth? Do we use it as a hammer against others that don't have that same belief, or maybe are just ignorant of that? God also said we have to deal with truth in mercy, right? If you look at how he dealt with the adulterer, he said, "Who's here to condemn you? Not me." So he's showing her what? Mercy. But what did he say to her? Go and sin no more. That's truth, right? If you don't have truth, then you don't need mercy, because anything goes, right? So you have to have truth, because that's what makes mercy. Does that make sense? But you have to have both. And so, you know, I'm an academic, right? We're dealing with AI now like I never thought, you know, I'm just trying to get the retirement train to the station so I can get off and let them do what they're going to do with it, because I just don't know how to deal with it. Because it's being used. What is AI? What is artificial intelligence? Is it a tool? Can we use it to be more productive? Can we use it to be more efficient? Sure. Can we use it to cheat?
Yes.
Can we use it to produce goods that are not our own? Sure. So, you know, technology is going to be there. It's going to make things confusing if we let it. If we keep God focused in Scripture, then that alleviates a lot of that ambiguity. I hope that helps.
What does the Catholic Church believe in terms of, let's say, you know, obviously getting divorced is not a good thing, but if a man and woman gets divorced and then they remarry, is that considered, would the Catholic Church remarry them into the church?
So the
How would
church,
that work?
it's a good question. So the church does not divorce is a civil proceeding, right? So the assumption of the Catholic Church is that if you got married sacramentally, right, you went through the proper procedure, follow the proper procedures, then you have a valid marriage. And if the couple separates, that doesn't invalidate the marriage. They're still married in the eyes of the church. The civil authorities can do whatever they want.
Gotcha.
Okay? Now, there is a process called, you can get the marriage annulled, which, guess what? It goes through those three things and determines if one of those three things, unconditional, forever, children, was not present. Right?
Okay.
So I said in the interview that yes, I wanted children. Right? But behind my back, I had my fingers crossed. I really don't want children, but I want to get married to my wife, to my engagement, the betrothed, right? And so I'm going to say what I need to say to make that happen. Well, follow me? So that's a lie, right? They didn't agree to one of the conditions of marriage, of a Catholic marriage, and so that if that can be proven, then that invalidates the marriage. It's as if the marriage never existed.
Okay, I understand
Does that make sense?
What about, let's say, because the unconditional, because I'm just thinking of different scenarios that could occur. Let's say, like, God forbid, like, one of the individuals dies or something. Could they then get remarried?
Yeah, once one of the spouses dies, then that removes any of the impediment, unless you're a deacon.
Yeah.
So if my spouse predeceases me, then I cannot. I am. That becomes an impediment.
Right.
But you know, if you're a lay person and your spouse dies, that you are free to marry.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Now, luckily, you know, Deacon Frank is our local resident expert on annulments. So if I misspeak, please
You're doing fine.
I'm an accountant, did I tell you that?
Question, a prenuptial agreement would be disallowed. Because that's.
Funny you should ask that.
That's a condition.
So, I would agree with that, okay? In fact, and this has happened, dealing with it's happened twice, that the couple has raised up the issue of prenuptial agreement. And my view is, if you're entering this wholeheartedly, unconditionally, and with free will, you shouldn't need one, right? Now, I have spoken to a canon lawyer about this, and they're like, well, they were a little vague on it, all right? But my opinion, did I tell you I was an accountant? My opinion is that's a condition, so I'm not sure that would hold in a court of law, but,
And things are changing a little bit.
okay.
But there are very specific circumstances, and that's.
Such as?
Business interests and things like that.
Okay.
That don't really affect the couple themselves, if you will, in the union. But that's also one of the things that we go downtown to get guidance on.
But does it make sense? I mean, that kind of adds, to me, that's adding a condition. I would pursue that further. And in both cases, they finally decided not to get one. So remove that issue. But interesting. Anything else? No good?
Can you talk about, excuse me, Catholics that may be married outside the church, but then want to have their
Sure.
marriage in the church?
So and this happened a lot during COVID, that, couples, were planning on getting married, things fell apart because of COVID, and for a multitude of reasons, they decided to get married civilly, okay? And then subsequent to that, they then wanted they wanted the church to recognize their marriage. We call that a convalidation, where they want the church to validate their marriage. The reality is you have to go through the same process. It's exactly the same. It looks the same. The rite is virtually the same, even to the point where I asked, I just did one a couple weeks ago, do you want to exchange rings? They've been wearing their rings, but do you want to exchange, just to make it more wedding marriage-like. But yeah, does that answer the question? Okay. So that would be, I would highly recommend that.
How is divorce viewed in the Catholic Church when one party is not Catholic, but they're married in the Catholic Church? So you have a Protestant and you have a
Okay.
Catholic, they're married in the Catholic Church.
Okay.
And then they divorce.
They still, and if the Protestant party wants to get married, I mean, the Catholic Church has no say in that, they're not Catholic, right? If they wanted to get married to another Catholic in a then they'd have to go through an annulment process. Does that make sense? The Catholic party that was in that, they have to get it, and they would have to get that. If they wanted to get married in the church again, they would have to get that first marriage annulled.
What's a dispensation?
So let's say, to use your example, there's a Protestant and a Catholic want to get married. I can't grant permission to do that. I have to get dispensation from the Archbishop to allow a Catholic to marry a non-Catholic. Okay. Now, they have never said no. But if you don't get it, it invalidates the marriage.
That's when you have to go through a convalidation too.
No, you can, if a Catholic
No?
and a non-Catholic who've never been married before, all right, so there's no impediment there, they can get married in the Catholic Church.
But if they want to then be married in the Catholic Church afterward.
After they've been civilly married?
Yes.
Or married in
Yeah,
sure,
Yeah.
it's called a convalidation,
Yeah,
that's exactly.
right.
Yeah.
after a civil marriage,
Yeah.
same type
Or
of
a
thing.
marriage of a different denomination.
Correct.
Right.
We're
There's
getting,
a lot of those.
we're below the weeds now, we're into the roots. But you can get married in a non-Catholic, but you have to get permission from downtown, that's another dispensation.
This is probably also a roots question. If someone has been divorced but not received an annulment, I've heard that
I'm maybe misquoting this, but I've heard that can't be, a sin that's forgiven in confession, or that someone can't receive forgiveness. Like, can you just sort of talk about?
We said two things there.
I know, and I'm not clear on it.
They should not receive communion.
Okay.
But, I mean, I don't know, well, there's probably a few things that, sins that call that, that go up to heaven. That's not one of them. So, that I know.
Actually, it's any sacrament. They're not really even technically allowed to go to reconciliation either.
Until they get the annulment.
Until they get, if that's again, right, if they're divorcing their.
That's different than saying it can't be forgiven.
Yeah.
That's different. Yeah, but once you get it annulled, then, does that make sense? You have to go to you have to go through the process of whether the marriage was valid or not.
Sorry, can you just repeat the question and answer?
So her question was, number one, and if I'm misstating this, then please correct me, but unless you want to say your
Yeah,
question.
I can maybe just rephrase it. So there is someone that I know who has been divorced, subsequently remarried.
Not in the church.
I don't know
Okay.
necessarily, but there was no intention of ever getting the first marriage
Annulled. So it was not in the church.
Okay, and so, yeah, I'm just curious then, like, what would the implications be for that person as far as sort of forgiveness of breaking that, what should have been an unconditional bond
Well,
with their person?
again, if it's annulled, then that's saying that it wasn't.
It was not.
Getting the divorce is not sinful.
Okay.
Because the church doesn't recognize it.
Like,
It's a civil process.
Right, so then I guess
Go ahead.
what would the implications of the remarriage be, considering that they did not get the first marriage annulled?
Well, this gets a little complicated, I'll make it really brief. If they're remarried and they're having a full married life, that's the action that's the sinful piece. Because you're not supposed to have physical relations outside of marriage, right? So you're not married, because really you're not. So that would be the part that would need to be, confessed. Once they can get back to the sacraments, which they will need the annulment for, or going through the process of getting an annulment, most priests will allow someone to go to confession like that. So it gets really complicated but that's why we have
Which part? The annulment part.
the annulment part and just the individual situation, because there are lots of questions and a lot of mitigating factors that someone who has the experience and the training needs to go through, because there are many misconceptions. From my 13 years of experience, I've had people that stayed away from the church for 50 years or so because they were afraid of an annulment, and it ended up being what was called a lack of form, meaning there was a lack of form. They didn't get, and the annulment took a month, and then it was done. So that's why it's best to come to the church and say, hey, this is my situation, this is what I want to do, and we talk about it, like Deacon Scott said.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, so, continuing like what you said, you just said, I just have a question. You mentioned mercy, seeing the person with mercy and like the unconditional thing, but then you tell them to sin no more. So if, let's say that person is LGBT, is there any resources that the Catholic Church has that would able to help understand that person and make them closer to Christ?
Sure. There are, just like any couple, right? Outside of marriage, they're charged with living a chaste life, whether they're hetero or homosexual, right? It doesn't matter. All right. Now, society. I get back to society again. They're not willing to commit to that, right? But that's what the church believes, and so. As society moved away from the God-centeredness of society, then those relationships were open to do whatever they wanted, whether they were same-sex or not, right? What we're saying is all relationships outside of marriage, as Frank said, should be chaste. Does that make sense? Now, there are ministries within the church for people with same-sex attraction, and they help them to live a chaste life.
So the reason I'm asking is I know someone in that community, but this person was Catholic until they were like 24, and then they turned away from the church because they were not supported. So
We're not supporting what?
they
A lifestyle.
there is no help for that person to make them understand what they're sinning for and
Yeah.
help them convert.
There are ministries within the Catholic Church for that specific
Okay.
purpose. I believe it's called
Courage.
Courage.
Can I have like a resource afterwards or like email?
Yeah, I'll have to Google it. I'll have to ask AI. Yes, there is. I would be happy to do that. There's one more thing I wanted to add. But so when we talk about truth and mercy, what's the objective in that? What was Jesus's objective with the adulterer? I don't want to condemn you, but I want to convert you. I want a conversion of heart. To what? To entering into a fuller relationship with Jesus Christ. And if you're living a life of sin, you can't do that fully. Does that make sense? And so that's why you have to have mercy, because people don't respond to the hammer, right? They're responding to that invitation to enter into a closer relationship, to conversion.
This person felt the hammer instead of
Yeah.
feeling welcome. So.
Well, Pope Francis was famous for saying, he wanted his ministers to go out to the margins, right? Well, why? Because there were people out in the margins that needed Jesus Christ. But don't leave them there. Bring them back, right? And that's what we lose sometimes. That's the mercy piece, is bringing them back in mercy, in love. The same unconditional love that Jesus shows from the cross, the same unconditional love we bring to a marriage. Does that make sense?
Question, if a Catholic and non-Catholic get married, is it true they cannot have a nuptial mass?
Well, I don't think that's true.
We can have nuptial mass.
Yeah, I typically recommend against it only because half the congregation can't come to communion. In fact,
Well, a non-Catholic partner can't either.
correct. So it's kind of, in fact, now in the new, this is a relatively new rite. They retranslated it, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, I think. You can actually have communion outside of Mass. So if the couple wanted to receive communion without having a Mass, you can now do that. Now, I don't know why you would do that. If you want to receive communion, have a Mass, right? So, anyway, but yes. All right? Yes, sir.
So to that point, my wife and I, we got married with a I'm non-Catholic, she's Catholic, and we did the whole mass. And about half the attendants, right, so I come from a Protestant background, and we have some friends who are non-religious. And kind of just the way I saw it, and the way that I saw it at the time, and I see it still today, is, it's a testament to the sacrament, and it's a powerful thing. And I'm sitting there, looking at my wife taking communion, and wondering, hey, when am I gonna get the kick in the pants to do it?
Hence you're here today. Which is why you're here. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah. But some people, they find it to be off-putting.
Sure.
But so, it's great that you did that. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all. Appreciate it.
If you could lead us in closing prayer.
Sure.
Are there any announcements before we close? Just we'll get a reminder about when we meet.